You're listening to WVOF 88.5 Fairfield University, and this is The Sweep with yours truly, Ali Haidar.
And I'm Cole Townsend.
The Sweep is an unapologetically progressive talk show in which we discuss wedge issues and a range of topics in a progressive perspective, one that is rarely conveyed on mainstream media. On today's episode, we'll be discussing the ongoing sexual allegations against former Vice President Joe Biden, Ben Shapiro and the alt-right, the Senate's vote on the Green New Deal, and Trump's cutting of aid to Central American countries, and his threats of closing the southern border. We're also joined with Nick Toledo, a fellow classmate of ours, who brings a more nuanced progressive perspective. Nick, thank you for joining us and being the first guest on The Sweep. Before we start, please tell us about yourself.
Thanks for having me on. I'm a part-time student. I'm a politics major, and I think Colin has described me as a wonk pretty frequently.
The wonkiest of the wonks, yes.
Yeah, so thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
Exciting. We're excited to hear your different perspective. And for those of you listening, we are a progressive show, as I mentioned before. However, most people think that the progressive front is unified, but we do have those who have more of a nuanced opinion on certain subjects. For instance, me and Colin don't necessarily agree on everything.
There's like 3 issues that we disagree on. This is true.
But anyway, so I guess the first story we'll be talking about is the allegations against former Vice President Joe Biden. And Colin, so if you want to take this one and just talk to us about what's going on with Joe Biden.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first I want to preface by saying that it is no secret that Joe Biden is a little bit creepy. Creepy Uncle Joe has been a thing for quite some time, saying that he reminds you of your creepy uncle who's a little too touchy with the girls, no matter their age. And, we really saw that come to the stage when former Democratic candidate Lucy Flores stated that Biden kissed her on the back of the head without consent during a 2014 campaign event. And so this has been something that, of course, considering, Biden's stature in the media and in politics in general, has picked up a lot of steam. People have been talking about quite a lot. She specified that she did not think it was assault, but nonetheless a violation of her personal space. And, this makes sense. I think that, criticism is definitely valid. And it's certainly hard to speak out against the vice president, no less, of the United States when it comes to, that weird, creepy interaction. Now, the issue with Biden is that he's been known as a close talker, and so that's something that people are defending him for a lot. And this is true, even with men. So it's not just with women. Even with men, he does get very close. Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks described, meeting him and how close he got to whisper things in his ear. So this is kind of just, to an extent, the way Joe Biden is, but at the same time, you really do want to, rein that in, especially if you're considering a 2020 run, which he has for the most part. He all but announced it. I don't know about you guys. Do you have any opinions as to whether or not you believe that this might damage his chances at a 2020 run, or, whether or not he'll enter the race whatsoever?
So I think, like we discussed on the show a few weeks ago, Biden's going to be haunted by what he did in 1990s, right? In the 1990s. And I think
Absolutely.
This event with Lucy Flores and with other women who apparently have been coming out, it's just going to worsen his reputation among, I would say, the moderate left, the Democrats, like the typical suburban moms and dads. And I've seen videos of Biden. I remember back in 2016 as a senior in high school of, he does do some creepy things. There's without a doubt that he does. And Colin, you made a point that it's difficult to come out against the former vice president. And that's true. There's such a power dynamic. And I just want to say, imagine the woman coming out against a former president right now, our current president, President Trump. So yeah. I just think it's interesting. Will it hurt him? I think that's yet to be seen. But I do think it might hurt him. I mean, definitely his reputation. I mean, just imagine what Trump might call him, like Handsy Joe or something like that. So
creepy Uncle Joe.
That's my opinion right there. So,
I'd say if I was one of Biden's advisors, looking at the polls alone right now, which he's pretty much ahead in, or at least tied with Bernie, you'd want to advise him to run. He has financial backing. He has good support within the party. But he does have a lot of things from his past and even from his present that are going to come back to haunt him. And what he should be considering is his legacy. Right now, he was vice president to President Obama, and he's going to be known for that, and that's going to give him a very favorable chapter in the history books. Him running and losing a presidential campaign now
for the third time.
Yes, plus whatever Trump can do to his legacy through, his Twitter attacks. I'm not sure if it's worth it.
We won't be remembering Joe Biden for the Obama-Biden memes at the end of 2016.
Yeah.
We'll be remembering him for something else.
Personally, the way that I remember Joe Biden is not by his vice presidency, though I do want to point out that a big part of why he became Obama's VP is because he had, referred to Obama as the first mainstream, clean-cut, well-dressed black guy, which, was clearly very racist, maybe not intentionally, but how you have that once again, that creepy uncle or that grandfather who's just a tad bit racist without meaning to be. But I mean, beyond that, more concerning is, as you mentioned, he'll be haunted by his record in the 90s. And when I think of Joe Biden in the 90s, I don't think of, the goofy gaff man from the memes. I think of, a rather aggressive person pursuing tough on crime measures. He was absolutely instrumental in the passing of the 1994 crime bill. And, there is, if you go on C-SPAN and look through the record, there is, a video of him very confidently decrying the fact that, crime is sweeping through the nation. It has to be dealt with. There is a movement of super predators, these people who are unempathetic, who are going to become massive problems to society. And, he constantly reminded, the congressional field that they won't just be coming after other people, they'll be coming after his family, Congress's family, etc., in the streets, and attacking them really violently if we did not stamp them out right now. And so that rhetoric, that super predator rhetoric, which is not only a racially tinged, but also responsible for an explosion in mass incarceration, as, the prison system's increasingly privatized. And to this day, you can still see that even though crime rates have fallen, violent crime rates have fallen dramatically, we still see, no reduction to the prison population. And it has to do with the, policy legacy left behind by people like Biden, by people like Bill Clinton. And personally, for those reasons alone, people speculate as to whether or not the handsy Biden is enough to disqualify him from running in 2020 or winning at the very least. But I will say, regardless of whether or not that does, his record is enough to alienate me from ever voting for him in the primary, especially considering the great field of talents we have right now.
Let me take the point of a Biden pundit on CNN for a second. And what I'm going to say is that was the 90s, and Democrats were trying to brand themselves as tough on crime to stay competitive. We don't necessarily agree with what the party did in the 90s. Moving the party to the right, in my opinion, was a mistake. But it's what they thought they had to do to survive.
The issue is Biden is still willing to do that now. I mean, for example, calling, Mike Pence, of all people, a not-so-bad guy, and talking about, very prominently his ability to work across the aisle. That's all good and well, except, we've documented many times over the polarization of this country. They try to convince you that it's equal on the media, but truly speaking, it is asymmetric. You could look at the voting records. Republicans have polarized to the right significantly more than Democrats have to the left. And as a result, Democrats like Joe Biden, when they work across the aisle with Republicans, tend to work towards their right-wing ends as opposed to that of, left-wing ends. And so I just can't support Biden.
I completely agree, but to a point, I think that's what he's going for. He's going for that appeal to conservative independence because in his mind, that's still what the party needs to do to survive.
Well, yeah, going off of that, a lot of Democrats still think they're living in the 1990s, right?
Yeah.
Where and over the last few, I'd say decade or two, right, since the 90s, with the exception of Obama, because Obama is an interesting character, even though he is, in my opinion, a moderate. I don't think he's as center-right as maybe Biden is, because Obama came to the Senate, I believe, in 2004, clear way out of the 90s, and it's true. They act as if Newt Gingrich is still in the House, and I just find it so fascinating how Democrats, the Republicans have moved more to the right since with the rise of the 2009 Tea Party. Democrats continue to play off as really static in a way. They don't want to move.
They're still convinced that, if they go too far to the left, they're going to alienate the mythical middle voter. But there's a lot of data that suggests that that mythical middle voter does not exist in the same capacity that they believe. And if you look, Bernie Sanders, by far the most left-wing, presidential candidate we've had, in a long time, if not ever. He completely dominated, very moderate Hillary Clinton in all the, localities where Trump won.
No, I think that, going off of that, when it comes to Biden, the thing is, like, going off the whole, like, allegations, I think people are going to make the correlation or trying to equivocate that Biden and Trump, are on the same ground in a way. I think this is, dangerous because not only is it false, or they might even equivocate Biden and Bernie, right, with the sexual harassment claims in his
All
campaign.
three of those would certainly be false equivalencies.
Well, it's true, but people are going to try to brand that. Trump has had multiple rape claim allegations against him. Bernie, while his campaign did suffer from harassment claims, he has come out and promised. And the question is, Bernie isn't the person who is at the in the spotlight of this, right?
Yeah.
No one is accusing Bernie of anything. People are accusing Biden of being too handsy. People are accusing the president of sexually assaulting women.
I mean, take a step back from this conversation and look at the party as a whole. The Democratic Party is in the political wilderness right now. Are we the party that's going to keep fighting these battles like Newt Gingrich is still in the House? Or are we the party of FDR that's going to embrace a growing populist base? It's going to embrace growing economic concerns in the country, and it's going to guide us through the next 20 years of what's going to be a pretty rocky road economically.
Well, I would certainly argue that we do need to be the party of FDR, if not the party of, further left-wing ideologies. And, consequently, we do have to leave behind this 90s rhetoric. And Joe Biden, was there for the time. I guess you could say he was fine for the time. But I do think he should be someone that we look to in regard from the past, and perhaps we decide we're not going to make the same decisions and the same mistakes because we do recognize the shifting political landscape, and also just morally and financially, we were wrong all around in the 90s, and we decide to leave him in the past instead of trying to make him the forebearer for the Democratic Party of the future.
I agree. The party did what they thought they needed to do to survive.
I think the 90s were a dark time for the Democrats because of, like, the repercussions of today, right? We're still haunted by the 90s. Many Democrats are. And I think Democrats, like you said, the Democratic Party might have been in a political wilderness, or they might still be in it, but I really think that the way out of the forest is through, left-wing populism in a way, which I think, as Colin's comments earlier, most Americans support left-wing policies, such as the Green New Deal, Medicare for All,
free college,
yeah. Getting out of endless wars in the Middle East, all over the world. So that's definitely a path out. I'm just afraid that, there's going to be a resurgence of the 90s Democrat, right? And it's not necessarily to say that there is a resurgence because they're not necessarily gone, right? But I just think that party, that wing of the party, even though they were decimated in 2016 and arguably since 2010, that they're still a very, very strong force.
Yeah, they're still clinging on for life.
I agree. I think when you look at these red states, I don't think they're red states. I don't think we will have a problem winning them if we focus on economic populism.
Mm-hmm. And that actually worked for us immensely in, the 2018 midterms. Yeah. I said this before on the show, but after 2016, we were so concerned that we would never really recover the Midwest, and the geopolitical landscape of the country had drastically changed, forever. And 2018 swept around. Democrats, instead of focusing on, certain, poor neoliberal policies or, purely on social justice or even purely on hatred of Donald Trump, focused on things like protecting Obamacare and, to an extent dealing with immigration and keeping DACA alive. And that worked immensely. We saw, Democratic gains that we have not seen in quite some time.
I think looking forward to 2020, what we can take from 2018 is the on-the-ground grassroots work.
Absolutely. That can never really be dismissed, I think.
No, it kept the party engaged, and it kept voters feeling like they were a part of the political process, which is something that I feel a lot of Americans are losing out on right now.
I mean, right now, grassroots organization started with the Democrats, if I'm not wrong, right? Mm-hmm. With Sanders coming in and saying that he's not accepting any PAC money from 2016, or even prior than that. I don't think he's accepted any sort of corporate money.
He hasn't accepted corporate PAC money, but to be clear, in 2016, he did accept labor PAC money.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's good that we mentioned that, but I think there still is a significant difference, and I think you'd agree, between corporate and labor.
No, that is true. Though labor can be a corrupting force, but not nearly as corrosive as, corporations for sure. I just do want to point out the fact that he did get, about 76% of his funds from people, which is still, by that point in time, unprecedented. But, we do want to point out the nuances. But, it's definitely been good to discuss Biden and the future direction of the party. But I imagine we should probably move on to covering other topics, right? We have a full docket ahead of us.
Like I mentioned in the beginning of the show, we have a lot to cover. And so the next story I added to the agenda for this episode because I thought it was interesting. So Ben Shapiro, a famous conservative commentator and the current founder and I believe editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, had an interview with The Economist, a left-wing publication, which I think they're based in the UK. And so he had an interview with them, and when they released the interview in the form of an article, they titled it... They described Ben Shapiro as an alt-right sage and a pop idol of the alt-right. And so basically what happened was Mr. Shapiro had a meltdown on Twitter about it, because they called him alt-right. And we'll get into the reason why he kind of was triggered in that sense. He tweeted, and I just find this funny, he tweeted, quote, "The ratio on this piece is merely a fraction of what it should be because F this BS." Unquote. That's what he said. This is the same person who claims to destroy liberals with facts, but it's funny when he gets triggered, he goes on Twitter and he uses, vulgar language. And so I'm not saying what The Economist did was right, but here's an original description of Ben Shapiro in the article. The article, when I had access to it, described Mr. Shapiro as courting controversy. He relies on it. It serves as an opening salvo to be heard above in digital media. His views are classically religious conservative. He suggests that transgender people suffer a mental disorder. He opposes same-sex couples raising children. He has said, and sort of retracted, that Arabs like to bomb, crap, and live in open sewage, unquote. So that was the original description. I believe they've changed that after the outrage. And so I just thought it was interesting because this leads to the question, is Ben Shapiro an alt-right sage? And this question is interesting because, for those who don't know, the alt-right is a identitarian group, mostly online, that is just obsessed with identity, and they've been heavily associated with white supremacy and white nationalism. So some would argue that Ben Shapiro is not because of the white supremacist nature of the alt-right, and the fact that Ben Shapiro is Jewish. Ben Shapiro on Twitter cited the fact that he was one of the top 10 most targeted journalists in 2016 as he received a significant amount of anti-Semitic hate on Twitter. And also how when he worked for Breitbart, the infamous conservative news outlet, which is also associated with the alt-right, he was critical of Steve Bannon, who worked heavily with the Trump administration. But others would argue that Ben Shapiro, although he wasn't directly associated with the alt-right, he has entertained ideas that are espoused by them. Like I mentioned, he was the former editor-in-chief of Breitbart, a website that aligned itself under the alt-right under Bannon. Shapiro resigned after a Breitbart reporter was assaulted, and Breitbart refused to do anything about that. Shapiro has also been under criticism for inspiring the Quebec City mosque shooter, who had obsessively checked Shapiro's Twitter account 93 times the month of the shooting. Shapiro defended himself by stating that if he was responsible, then Bernie was responsible for the baseball shooting attack on Steve Scalise. So my question for you guys is there an equivalency between Bernie and Shapiro? For me, I don't think so, because Shapiro once stated that the small radical Muslim population was a myth and that the majority of Muslims were Islamists. And I don't think Bernie has ever said that about Republicans.
Look, Ben Shapiro loves creating false equivalencies between him and liberal and progressive leaders to try and legitimize himself. We should not be afraid to call him alt-right. He worked for Breitbart. I mean, look, we should not be afraid to call him a racist. We should not be afraid to call him a homophobe. And we should not be afraid to call him a xenophobe. We need to call out these evils when we see them, and we can't tiptoe around it just because he's going to go on a Twitter rant and try and compare himself to the people in our movement.
Yes, I definitely agree. As far as I'm concerned, the alt-right, as it is used, as a political categorization, is a little bit murky to begin with, but it often, as far as I'm concerned, right now I have Making Sense of the Alt-Right by George Hawley, I believe. Yeah, George Hawley pulled up. And, they describe it as an online right-wing movement, that is, as Ali mentioned, identitarian, that rails against political correctness, and, by virtue of it being an online movement, moves, generally speaking, through, online memes, the internet, social media, whatever. The thing is, I also do not really hesitate to say that, to some extent, the mainstream right, but especially when you get to the farther right, the alt-right, the white nationalists, that they are, if not fascist themselves, have very fascistic tendencies. And fascism does tend to, there's a question of, can he be alt-right if he's Jewish and the alt-right is like a white identity group? One, there is, to this day, a lively discussion in America as to whether or not Jews are considered white. And, so a white nationalist could, to some degree defend that. Race realists, for example, commonly refer to, Jews as being above whites when it comes to genetic intelligence and things of that nature based off of IQ. And also, fascism itself has no problem, if fascism is saying supreme authority and supremacy for us, whoever the mythical us would be, they have no problem, aggregating lots of people into us until they have, largely dealt with their enemies, their political enemies, in which case they then start turning on themselves and breaking themselves down to smaller and smaller groups. So for now, Ben Shapiro is one of the most visible modern conservatives who has a very active and respected online platform, who can gain the attention, respect, and reverence of, even mainstream, allegedly left-wing media. So as far as I'm concerned, I have no qualms calling him an alt-right leader.
I completely agree, but I would like to clarify. Yes, he is all of these things. Yes, we should call these things out when we see them. But we should ask more specifically, what are his policy points? He says facts don't care about feelings. What policy initiatives is he going to propose that are going to make American lives better?
So, going off of that, I mean, the whole policy thing, right? I mean, Shapiro, all he does is play on, ideas and, philosophy, which a lot of policy comes from, right?
We're just discussing ideas, bro.
When he wants to debate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I spoke to someone like this, AOC is a well-established congresswoman who has had a tremendous impact in Congress, in the political sphere in America.
In the short time she's been here, yeah.
Compared to Shapiro. And, going back to what you guys said, I agree with you guys for the most part in terms of your sentiment towards Shapiro and the alt-right. But one thing I do am skeptical is I know for the fact that the alt-right is inherently anti-Jewish, right? So the question is, could a Jewish person, in essence, be with the alt-right? And also, Shapiro has also, to be fair, he has come out on, the Daily Wire, and he has said that he's criticized the alt-right, and he has, in a way. But my thing is, I don't think we should be calling the alt-right. He is, however, a major benefactor to the alt-right pipeline, and in a way, he is a conduit to the alt-right. For instance, right, Shapiro is someone who's called called for the violent transfer of people in Palestine, has promoted articles on the Daily Wire that have called Muslims a disease in Europe. He might not be completely with the alt-right just because of the fact that he's come out, criticized them, the fact because the alt-right, in a way, might reject him, in a way, because he is Jewish. but he certainly does push others to the pipeline. Like Nick was mentioning before, when does it, you might get exposed to a Louder with Crowder video on YouTube.
Yeah.
Where does it lead on between there? And you guys are right, there is no equivalency between the far right and the far left, right? No matter where the extreme is, the far right has committed more acts of violence. People will always bring up Antifa, right? Antifa, Antifa, Antifa.
And if all fails, Venezuela.
Right? The thing is, I can't, and I think I'm pretty updated with the news. I can't think of one incident where Antifa came out and shot up a place of worship in a way.
No.
Yeah.
And personally, you asked the question. I feel like I already gave my answer, but I do want to reiterate. I do think Ben Shapiro can be called alt-right. For starters, I want to point out the fact that most of the thought leaders within the alt-right and most of the pundits who are popular, like Jordan B. Peterson, to some extent Sam Harris, all these guys kind of cringe at the name alt-right and walk away from it. That doesn't mean much. And if you look at the actual, people who are, confirmed in a sense to be in the alt-right, there is always a sense of shame with it. When you saw people being exposed, having their identities exposed during the Charlottesville riots, or people yelling at them to take their badges off, you saw a lot of people who kind of broke with the group. And they're like, I'm kind of scared. This is in real life now, and I just realized there are real repercussions to this, and my identity has been revealed. So I don't necessarily think that just because he says he's not alt-right means that he isn't. And also, the fact that he's Jewish holds very little meaning to me, because once again, fascism has never hesitated to expand their ranks momentarily to get rid of a more immediate enemy. And in this case, you could say the alt-right takes large issue against, illegal Mexican immigration, despite the fact that majority of, undocumented immigrants coming across the border are no longer Mexican, and take large issue with Arabs and Muslims in particular, which he speaks out against quite a lot.
Yeah, alt-right light is still alt-right.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
No, I agree. Actually, that's a good way. I feel like Shapiro might not be alt-right, but he could be alt-light, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, like I said, the Quebec City mosque shooter looked him up 93 times the month before. I mean, he looked up a bunch of other people who are on the right. And to be fair, in that book that you mentioned, Colin, the author writes about how one of the original ideologies that the alt-right heavily draws from is paleoconservatism.
Mm-hmm.
And paleoconservatism, in a way, was religious, but also, in a way, anti-Jewish. However, there was a lot of conservative Jewish thinkers did contribute to it. So this isn't a new question in a way. And this goes for the same thing. If there was a Muslim who, the one person I can think of is
Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Oh, she's ex-Muslim. But someone who identifies as a practicing Muslim would be Majid Nawaz, who is someone from the UK. And so if had a Muslim say that he's on the right but espouses certain things that could be construed as alt-right, I'd say the same thing about him. This isn't just because it's Ben Shapiro. So it's a really interesting question, and we'd have to see how it goes in the future. But I think we can all agree that while we might disagree on what to call Ben Shapiro, I do think that we can agree that he definitely has significant influence for the alt-right. So for those of you watching The Sweep, thank you so much. We'll be right back after we take a quick break.
Ranger Station.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to report a bear sighting in the forest. 1 second, I'm having a smoke. Next thing I know, I'm face-to-face with Smokey Bear.
Wow.
And he told me it only takes one spark to start a wildfire.
Did you know 9 out of 10 wildfires are caused by humans?
I had no idea.
That's why Smokey's famous and you're not. Get your Smokey on. If you see someone in danger of starting a wildfire, step in and make a difference. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council. Learn more at SmokeyBear.com.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Hey parents, pick up your kids without embarrassing them with OMGPS, a navigation system that tells you how far away you need to park when you pick them up.
Keisha at mall. Proceed to outer food court.
Thanks, OMGPS.
OMGPS is not available in stores because it doesn't exist. But that's okay. You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent, because kids in foster care don't need perfection. They need you. For more information on how you can adopt, go to adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt Us Kids, and the Ad Council.
You're listening to WVOF 80.5, Fairfield University, and this is The Sweep with yours truly, Ali Haidar.
I'm Cole Townsend.
And we're back. And with our guest, Nick Toledo.
Don't forget our boy Nick.
Of course. For those of you who listened to the first part before the break, thank you for sticking around. Our next topic, we'll be discussing about the Green New Deal and its update in the Senate. So, Colin, if you want to take that away, feel free.
Yeah, so the fact of the matter is, I said it, on March 26th, which was Tuesday, unfortunately, I don't think we got to it during the last transmission, but the Green New Deal was shot down in the Senate, despite having, some decent support behind it in the House. And so, just to recap, for those of you who might be uninitiated, what is the Green New Deal? It is essentially intended to combat climate change and a troubled economic system at the same time, and saying that no, environmental protection does not compete with economic development and growth. And so we actually have a quote here lined up from a researcher named Greg Carlock, who's done some great research on climate change, the Green New Deal, and then transmitting the essentially hopeful theoretical ideas that they have into actual policy suggestions. Climate change is an emergent property of a bad economic system. That outdated economic system, the nebulous set of assumptions and power relationships that goes under the name neoliberalism, is a real target of the Green New Deal. So, once again, it was meant to target a very faulty economic system, which we've argued on the show many times, is not just propagated by conservative ideology, but also by middle-of-the-road neoliberalism, which is also, leaned too hard into corporatist favor, instead of, focusing on the people and what they really need. And in the media, I've seen numerous attempts to try to smear the Green New Deal as this ridiculous pipe dream, as something that would ban cars, that would ban planes and ban cows, things that are truly just right-wing smears with absolutely no factual merit or validity whatsoever. But, because of the political stigma, it has been a little hard getting actual polling data on it. However, one organization did go out and do polls where instead of calling it the Green New Deal, they questioned people off of each individual potential policy proposal. And what they found was that it was actually fairly popular among the people. And so the fact that it was shot down in the Senate with, I believe, 0 votes behind it is absolutely disheartening. And it leaves us with the question, what's next for the Green New Deal and the Green Agenda? I want to say before, opening up the field to, the two of you, that the Democratic Party had no real climate policy prior to, the launch of the Green New Deal campaign. Really, it was not high up on their docket at all. It was not something they were really considering. And while they would talk about it and use it to differentiate themselves from Republicans, they did not really seem to put any weight behind it. So once again, what is next?
I don't think this vote means anything. I think that if you're a liberal, you should not be dissuaded by the flurry of Dems in disarray articles that are flooding your phones, news feeds, Twitter feeds, whatever right now. This was good. This got the name out there. Mm-hmm. The more you talk about a policy, the more name recognition happens, and eventually we'll be able to pass through all of the sort of fake news surrounding it. This was about getting the name recognition out there.
Yeah, I mean, so going off of that, I agree with you, Nick. I think it's really good getting the name out there. Also, I just my question is about how feasible it is to get it past Congress, right? I mean, right now we have a Republican White House. We have the House controlled by the Democrats and the Senate controlled by the Republicans. If the Green New Deal was able to pass the Senate, probably would pass the House then. But then would the president really sign it into law? We'll say he vetoes it. We need more votes. We need 2/3, right? So I agree with you. I don't think it's the end all be all, right? Because I think one thing, being progressives in a way, this is like a never ending battle, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. Even past 2020, even 20 years from now, 30 years from now, for how much we accomplish to how much we want to accomplish, we are always going to be fighting we're going to be fighting a battle, regardless if it's an uphill battle or regardless if we become the status quo in a way.
Let's hope we do.
Well, which will hopefully, which will take a long time. So I don't think it was the end all be all. Like I said, I think it was good. It was out there. I think it was good. It failing was perhaps the work of Mitch McConnell, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that 2020 or whenever Democrats control the Senate and the White House, as long as we still have the good progressive members like AOC, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, any of these progressive members in Congress pushing for this, then in the future, hopefully, we can get to a vote and hopefully get it passed. So like I said, I don't think it was bad because it was a given that it wouldn't pass either way. I mean, like we said, these parties have become so hyper-partisan, whereas if it'll be hard to even get past a moderate climate change deal, nevertheless, the Green New Deal.
Well, I think what we need to be focusing on, look, we're not going to get a supermajority in the Senate in 2020. It's just not going to happen. But if we can get an anti-lobbying and an anti-corruption bill through the House and through the Senate, even if we have to do it on budget reconciliation, that will make all of the entire liberal agenda, but especially the Green New Deal, significantly easier.
And that also kind of segues to, this wasn't necessarily something we had planned, and maybe we'll only spend a few minutes on it, but you actually, I know we've talked a lot about Bernie Sanders as someone we support on the show personally, but you have a lot of support for Elizabeth Warren because you do believe that she would be able to push that through in her first 100 days where she has the strongest political capital. Is that correct?
Well, that's her argument. I don't know if she could do it then. She might have to wait to do it under budget reconciliation or try and find another window. But she has said, and she's very open about her initial policy is going to be an anti-corruption bill. Getting money out of politics is a big focus for her. Once money is out of politics, something like the Green New Deal becomes significantly more feasible.
No, I agree. I mean, me and Colin were big Bernie people, and Colin would argue that I am more so than him.
I will say, because I do find a lot of very positive aspects. I think Bernie is still running largely on his platform from 2016, except this time, instead of running as essentially an independent candidate who wants to change the landscape, he's running to really win with his ideas. I view Warren as someone who, to a large extent, has picked up his ideas and ran with them.
Here's the thing, right? I would love Warren, right? I have no issues with Warren. I think she's pretty progressive, right? I used to think that she had one foot in the corporate door, one foot in the.
You've been listening to too much secular talk.
I have been. Great show. YouTube.com/secular talk with Kyle Kulinski. Great progressive talk show. But anyway, my only issue with Warren, in comparison to Sanders, is I like the policies she's giving out, right? Mm-hmm. I also like a lot of things she's been doing domestically, right? My only issue is her foreign policy. Is she going to be a hawk like Clinton, or is she going to be like a dove, right? I don't know. Maybe she has released something and I haven't seen it, but as of right now, I don't know what her policy is. I just think, and simply put, I really think Bernie is just better in the progressive sense. But does that make Warren any less of a progressive? Not at all. I think, if anything, she's got a really good shot. I'd love to see a Sanders-Warren ticket either way, with either one of them being the president or vice president. Ideally, Sanders the president, but I'm willing to concede that I think they're both great candidates in comparison to any other candidate, but not even in relative terms, just absolutely, right? I mean, these are great candidates.
Yeah, Bernie has the advantage of having run in 2016, so his platform was pretty much together. We haven't seen really any foreign policy discussion so far. That's going to come up. I don't know when, I don't know where, but we're going to have to try and figure out as a party where we want to go foreign policy-wise.
I just think, so the things I've seen, like, in terms of foreign policy, like, I think Sanders, even though it was kind of like he came out against, like, intervention in Venezuela. I've also seen a video of Warren, which kind of turns me off, of her appeasing, in a way, AIPAC. I think she was on a podcast and talking about the demographic threat in Israel and Palestine, which is a racist argument, right? Whenever you talk about demographics and a demographic threat, there's a racist,
the birth rates are declining.
Right? Exactly. And so that's what turns me off. However, if she can fine-tune those, I might be giving her a look. And I say I might because I think one thing for me is just a track record of a candidate. I think that's where Warren also might fall through on, even though her track record might also hold her up greatly, right?
I think she has a beautiful track record.
I think she's got a great track record. But like I said, in terms of what she said in the past, especially when it comes to foreign policy. I'm a little wishy-washy on that, but I'm willing to give her a chance. I mean, you never know. I mean, we're only in April, and what are we, a year and a half away from elections?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see. But anyway, we digress, but that was a great digression. Love talking about Warren and Sanders. Even sometimes maybe Pete Buttigieg or corporate Booker.
I also just love Warren's coats. Like, I do want to take a minute. I've discussed this many times, and I'm sorry to take up time on the show to discuss this.
No, this is
but
fine.
I love her coats.
This is really important. Her coats are amazing.
Here's another thing, right? People tell me, when I say, and I've said this before, despite what Colin thinks, I've said Warren is a really feasible candidate, a really great candidate for progressive. And people will say, how could you still support her after the whole Pocahontas thing? Listen, I think the whole Pocahontas thing, in which she got a DNA testing to prove that she was Native American, and it turns out she was only, 24th?
But that's basically, she never said anything beyond that. She said that she had some Native ancestry and that she was proud of her heritage.
Though that was all done, under the recommendation of advisors who I want to call a lot of things that I can't say on this show right now.
But we'll just say incompetent.
But here's the thing. I don't think it's even a big deal. Yes, she shouldn't have done that, right? And we can blame the advisors, we can blame whoever. But is it really the be-all, end-all for her?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna throw away my support for a candidate just because she took a DNA testing.
I think people are worried about the fact that she proved that she could fall for Trump's bait, and then fail to, because oftentimes liberals, across the board, whether you're a left-wing progressive or, a neoliberal, you fall into whatever rhetorical trap and argument that Republicans have set for you, and then you have a hard time getting out.
Yeah, to further digress, that is the appeal of Mayor Pete. Mm-hmm. It's that people see him as the polar opposite of Trump, and when you try and picture, try and picture him in a debate with Trump. What can Trump do to shake his demeanor? That's just.
I just think, like I said, I wouldn't throw support away from someone who took a DNA testing and did something like that. Whereas I think someone should lose support if they have multiple rape allegations against them, or as if they're maybe a little too touchy with people, right? So, like I said, Warren is great. Pete Buttigieg, however. You guys, like we discussed on the show, you guys might be more fans of him. I am a bit more skeptical of him. Various reasons. There was a Vice interview where he kind of took a somewhat neutral but kind of anti-policy stance, which I don't think he should be doing.
That was a little concerning because I think, your rhetorical framework is very much based around policy, so it's rather odd to say you're going to focus on rhetoric as opposed to policy. But in the past, what he's done, and the fact to me that he recognized Bernie Sanders in 2000 before he was even politically relevant on the main field, he's demonstrated in a number of ways to me that he does have priorities in the right place, and his record and his what he supports is very close to what Warren supports.
I agree. I would urge anyone to watch the CNN Town Hall that's on YouTube or read his Vox interview. He really goes into detail on a lot of stuff there.
Definitely. So for those of you listening, thank you for listening. Because of our digression, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to get back to the last two topics I've discussed. I'll be right back.
As a mother, I'm making it a point to get the H1N1 flu vaccine for my children. You see, children are especially vulnerable to serious complications from the H1N1 flu, which could lead to hospitalization and even death. That's why I'm urging parents to get their children vaccinated. Vaccination is safe and is the most effective way to prevent the flu. Get the facts at flu.gov. Together, we can all fight the flu.
A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
There's a monster under my bed.
For a child with asthma, monsters are everywhere.
There's a monster in my bathtub.
Something as innocent as a teddy bear or a bath toy could trigger their next asthma attack. Here are ways to help. Freezing stuffed animals to kill dust mites. Drying bath toys to prevent mold. Learn how to end your child's asthma attacks at noattacks.org or call 866-NO-ATTACKS because their next breath is in your hands. Brought to you by the EPA and the Ad Council.
You're listening to WVOF 88.5 Fairfield University, and this is The Sweep with yours truly, Ali Haidar.
And I'm Cole Townsend.
And we're joined with Nick Toledo. Sorry, Nick,
There we go.
So, for those of you listening, Nick is our first guest, so we're definitely going to try to work out the kinks of, cutting into ads and coming back. And for those of you actually listening, before our little digression about Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg, we're going to move on to two subjects that we'd like to discuss in today's episode, and they go hand in hand because they deal a lot with the southern of the U.S. The first one being that the president gutting economic aid to
Mexican countries.
That's the actual Fox News, Chiron.
Which is ridiculous, right? I mean, you think Fox News, as much as a trash network it is, would really who's in charge of the Chiron? That person needs to be fired. In fact, actually, they probably won't even be fired. This fits with their narrative. They're probably laughing it off.
Yeah, I mean, why hide their racism at this point?
Exactly.
Just flaunt it.
They're all Mexicans, right? You're vaguely brown.
Definitely. So, Nick, if you want to talk to us more about Trump cutting economic aid, and the other topic, which is him closing the southern border completely.
All right, let's talk about why this is a problem. If you have an influx of illegal immigration from somewhere, traditionally what you do is you ramp up economic aid to those countries. You help fund their infrastructure, so forth and so forth, and that reduces crime, and that reduces illegal immigration and migration. What Trump is doing by cutting aid to these countries is he's trying to increase illegal immigration. He wants there to be a caravan of the week every single week from now until 2020 because that is all he has to run on.
And then you get to claim there's an emergency. And I do want to point out before we move further that immigration is, a hot topic. We haven't discussed it so much on this show, but next week we will be having on our good friend Bob George, who's done some great research, firsthand economic research as to the effects of undocumented immigration on the economy of each individual state, the overall country, and also we'll be joined by our good friend Jay Glover, a Protestant minister who recently went with a group of, young students out to the border to see the real human interactions. But moving on.
Definitely.
I would just like to note that leading up to the midterms, all any media channel was talking about was the caravan because that's all the president was tweeting about. And come the next day, gone.
It disappeared.
Gone.
It was an artificially boosted story.
I just think it's disgusting how the Republicans and sometimes Democrats play on immigration in terms of alienating them, more so Republicans, right? And the whole Trump cutting aid to quote unquote these Mexican countries is just so counterintuitive. I think I've said this on the show, but I truly believe if we want to end illegal immigration, which I personally don't think is as big as a problem as everyone on the right thinks, look at what we did to Europe after World War II. We built them up again.
Germany.
We were afraid of a right-wing government coming up again, much like Nazi Germany, and so we implemented the Marshall Plan, which was great. It was a lot of money, but was it worth it? Absolutely.
The Marshall Plan worked.
And
foreign aid works.
Absolutely, you're right. And the thing
when it's doled out in good faith, when it is
Yes.
doled out purely to perpetuate, a subservient role of, these nations in the global economy, not so much. But if we do it in good faith, it could definitely be very beneficial.
And along with the Marshall Plan, if we stop backing or intervening in countries in Central and Latin America, right? I just think that, because of the Cold War, we've always backed the authoritarian governments for the most part. And that's really definitely biting us in the back today. So I really think it's counterintuitive to be cutting aid, right? Nick is right. This is definitely some sort of ploy to boost him. Not sure why. And I find it ironic, right? So when the U.S. moved their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in Israel, which was a huge public outcry, one of the first countries to follow them was Guatemala. And Guatemala is now having its economic aid cut.
Yeah. So how do they feel about that?
So you can't trust Trump, right? When most countries will do things for the U.S. To get on their better side, much like when Syria backed Iraq during the Iraq-Iran war, I believe Iran, during the Iran-Iraq war under Saddam Hussein. It was to help get under the U.S., be buddy-buddy with them. And so I just find it ironic. And, the irony continues, like we mentioned. The next thing is that, the president wants to cut off trade with our third biggest trade partner.
Yeah.
All right. I have no idea how he thinks this is going to work. I have no idea how he thinks this is going to help him. Produce prices are going to go through the roof. You're going to have mass amounts of produce on either side of the border just sitting in trucks rotting. For the millennials out there, your avocado toast is going to be no more.
No!
I'm so sorry.
No!
Do you think Ben Shapiro eats avocado toast?
Facts don't care about your feelings, but my feelings do love avocado toast.
Maybe so. And I just find it ironic how we really need to cut off trade. What is that going to do? Going off the last story about how he's cutting off economic aid to these countries, it goes counterintuitive to what, not only to like the whole idea of like rebuilding Central America, but also cooperating with Mexico. Yeah. The left-wing president had been lobbying Washington to invest more money into these countries, right? And now Trump wants to, ignore him, but also cut off trade.
Yeah, look, the president himself has no idea how
trade works.
Domestic or international economics work. And
can't even run his own business.
Yeah, and his foreign policy advisors are people who've been on the fringe of the Republican Party for the last 3 decades.
I mean, he has John Bolton. I thought we were done with him.
Look, and I think the fact of the matter is, if we are going to talk about immigration as a crisis, which it truly is not in the same way that climate change is, in the same way that inequality is, to some extent in the same way that insecurity due to gun laws are, but if we are going to regard climate change as this fallacious crisis, which we insist on doing in this country, perhaps we should look at some of the biggest, driving factors of it, like the political instability that we helped bring about in the 80s dirty wars, like the adverse effects of climate change being, shocker, most adverse on the equator, where Latin America is, and perhaps we should take true, bold measures to dealing with those issues, as you two have both mentioned, bringing these Latin American economies into the fold instead of trying to keep them subservient to the whims of America, right? Whereby they produce these very cheap commodities and don't really get anything good out of it in return. We need to build up Latin America out of good faith, not because we want any international favors or anything like that. If we want to see an end to this immigration crisis, as they insist on calling it.
Yeah, I agree. And as for cutting off trade with Mexico, from his standpoint, I hope that the Democratic super PACs are already writing the ads, because one of Trump's crowning achievements was replacing NAFTA with NAFTA. And now he's going to burn that back down to the ground.
I mean, he's going to replace Obamacare with nothing, so I'm surprised we didn't get into that today.
Well, do you think he's going to replace NAFTA with NAFTA again?
NAFTA squared.
Anyway, I had an interesting conversation with someone yesterday. I'm not going to get too into it because we are running out of time, but it was about Obamacare and Trump's campaign promise of repealing and replacing it.
Repeal and replace.
We were discussing about what campaign promises as of today
that he's actually carried through on.
That he's carried through, and this person I was talking with, I said that he can't campaign on that he repealed and replaced Obamacare because he hasn't, right? He might have gotten an individual mandate, but you can still sign up for Obamacare. Whereas this person was saying that he did fulfill partially some of that promise. However, he didn't campaign on partially fulfilling that promise. But I just find out how ironic it is. But, Nick, thank you for joining us on the show.
It's a pleasure.
Appreciate it. We're definitely going to have you again in the future. Like Colin mentioned, we'll be having our friend Bob George come on next show to discuss about the economic effects of immigration.
And also Jay Glover. And I think perhaps a week beyond that, we might actually be doing an experimental deep dive sort of episode.
Definitely. We have a lot of cool things planned for the sweep. So for those of you listening, thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you next week.